Ready, Greg. Hello, everyone. Welcome back after lunch. Thanks for sliding back in so we can get some things done. I'm going to do a lot of flailing around up here because you're going to get the after lunch, doze, right? It's like the presenter's worst nightmare. Oh, Greg, you can present right after lunch. Oh, great. Okay, here we go. If I'm shouting at you, it's because I see your eyes drooping. I'm going to come right up at you and come right. Okay, here we go. I already did this earlier, but I want you to see that I'm going to show you a couple of what we call constructs or diagrams. All of these things are available to you if you want to email me. So if you may want to take this down. If you have any questions, follow up, or whatever, it's pretty easy. Greg, G-R-E-G, at Auxano, which is a little harder because it's a Greek word, but it's A-U-X-A-N-O. A-U-X-A-N-O. So it's just Greg at auxano.com. So if you see like one of these diagrams that I'm about to do and you're like, oh, Greg's artwork is terrible. I wish there was a better version of that. There is. That's the good news. Just ask me for it and I'll get it to you. Okay. This is what we call the upper room and lower room that you heard me talk about a little bit earlier, but I wanted you to see the way we do the construct. And I just had a new friend up here in the front row that said, I know what our problem is at our church. Our people are in the lower room. I'm like, yeah, well, that's true. Most churches are. And you know what I say too? So am I sometimes. Right? We all have the tendency to say, is my church doing what I want it to do? I get that. I appreciate that, right? But just as a reminder, one of the things we're asking people to think about is, what are people seeing as their connection with your church? Are they connecting to the pastor or a personality? Sometimes it's not the pastor, right? So are they connecting to a personality? Are they connecting to the program? That's their favorite program? Are they connecting to the people, like their best friends, or I go here because my grandkids go here, and as soon as they don't go here, I don't go here anymore? Or the place itself. Remember I talked about the carpet? There's a little fondness for the place itself. Here's what I want to say about all these things. They're good. It's God's provision for a church. God provides great pastors and programs and places and people. That's not the point. I'm not trying to say that this is a negative thing. I'm trying to say that there's a better way in terms of people connecting with the mission of your church. Because what's characteristic about all four of these things at any church? You tell me. They change. So if I'm connected with any one of these things and it changes, now I'm on wobbly legs with my church because I was connected to the wrong thing. But if I'm connected to a clear vision for discipleship, we say that's upper room thinking. Now, you're pastors and elders and ministry professionals, basically, either as volunteers or as vocational. And I can tell you right now, without even knowing your specific story, that you spend most of your time addressing problems, challenges, and issues where? Lower room. One of the things you do when you start to think this way is you realize, oh, I'm not going to look down on people that ask me a lower room question. Because the tendency would be to say, oh, well, she's clearly living in the lower room. As opposed to saying, training your people, by the way, training your leadership about the upper room and lower room. And so what you train them to do is to go, when you hear someone trying to sort of tangle you up in the lower room, you have compassion. Because sometimes I'm in the lower room. So I have compassion and I say, you know what, I hear what you're saying. And that would be frustrating to me too. But let me just remind you of what our church is really trying to accomplish. Because I keep trying to I would say, pick up their heads. From whence cometh their help, right? It is the Lord, and it is our mission. So pick up their heads out of the lower room into the upper room and say, hey, Mark, let me just remind you kind of what we're trying to accomplish here. So I can imagine that that's frustrating right now, or that you wish that would be different, and I really feel bad about that. But I'm trying to just stay on our mission. And so what we end up saying is that clarity around how we do discipleship and how we do our mission is, in essence, building a staircase to get people to the upper room. So here's Joe. I want to introduce you to Joe. Joe is the guy that comes to your church whether he is a seasoned believer in Jesus Christ or whether he's a brand new, never been to church before, we both need it. So if I came to your church as a longtime follower of Jesus, I need clarity too. I want to know, what are you doing? How do I get involved with this? How do I know how you are particularly doing what God has called you to do at your church? Because it may be slightly different than what I've come from. By the way, this is the other thing that happens, is when you have clarity about what your vision is, it also enables you to deal with people who come from a different church. Now, maybe you've never had this at your church, but sometimes in other churches, people come from a different church and tell you how to do your business. Rarely, but every once in a while. Someone walks in and says, well, back at such and such Presbyterian, our pastor, you're all nodding because you've all heard that, right? But what you end up saying is, hey, I really appreciate that, but let me just remind you, the way we do it here is this, and it's a declaration of how you're doing your vision. So in essence, you're taking people who are not buying in yet, and you're walking them up the stairs, right? And what are these stairs? These are stairs of clarity. It's giving people handles to hold on to. Language, because words create worlds. So as much as it may be like a little nerdy to say, well, you got to declare and articulate what your strategy is, and you got to declare and articulate what your value. You're like, Greg, that's what business, corporate, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But the point is, there's a reason people do that, because you have to say something out loud and repeat it so that people go, that's who we are, so that when someone tries to say, I want your church to be this, you can say, I appreciate that. That's probably where you came from, but here's who we are. And I'm going to show you how to do that in just a second, but I wanted you to see this in kind of the visual version of it, the construct version of it, is we're trying to take people from the lower room to the upper room. This is not a bad thing. It's not negative. It's God's provision for your church, but it is not God's vision for your church. God's vision for your church is to make disciples in your way, in your style, in your context. So everybody tracking with me so far? Okay, good. Let's keep going because I'm going to fly. Here's the other tool I want you to see before I reveal to you the master tool, which is called the vision frame. But the other tool I want you to see, we call the kingdom concept. So it's a Venn diagram. You're familiar with Venn diagrams, right? But what we say is your road to understanding God's particular call on your church for discipleship, the road starts with an inquiry like this. It is your particular context, your place. In other words, a Presbyterian church in downtown Sacramento will likely be different than a Presbyterian church that's in a more rural area. A church that's in Sacramento will be different than one that's down with me in LA. And of course, Sacramento and LA are very different than Des Moines. Right? So you get that. So there's a specific thing happening in your place. And what I would say, remember what I said earlier, we need to become missionaries of our place. Don't presume that you know what's going on in your place. But I know like this church here now has these residential things happening right across the street. So what they would start to do when they're diagnosing their place is they would say, well, this is such and such a neighborhood, this is the kind of ethnicity we have brand new residential going right across the street, and they would start to paint the picture of their place. Which with that happening right there, it's 65 units coming in, that is going to change this church's ministry. But not if they're not paying attention to it and saying, well, we just do what we do. The people. I'm not talking about the people of the community now. Now I'm talking about the people inside your body, your congregation. Like I would say, you could have two churches like in the same town, but one church may be filled with people that are seasoned Christians, right? And they know how to do the Christian thing and they're doing great. Other church may be full of a bunch of people that don't even know how to spell Jesus yet. Well, that makes your church a different kind of a thing, right? Or some church may be a lot of white-collar people, executives, all the smartest men and women in the room are all in the same room, right? Or you may have a church that's not a bunch of executives, it's a bunch of working-class people, and so they have a different approach to the way they live their lives and whatever. Again, this is not good or bad. This is descriptive of who has God brought together in your congregation. And if you're not honest about that, you will do things that are a mismatch with what they should be, because God has brought a particular group of people to assemble in a particular geography or place. And here's another pretty big one: passion. And specifically, the passion that emanates out of the most visible and vocal leader. Often the senior pastor, but not always. But you say what you want. If the senior pastor has a holy discontent or a burn for some aspect of what's wrong with the world, that will seep into the identity of your church. You can fight it if you want. But I assure you that God has given men and women to leadership of churches, and they have a particular bent. For instance, you run into some churches, and all the pastor can think about and pray about and talk about and weep about is the need for foster care in their community. Beautiful. If you don't think that's going to affect what happens in your church, you're missing something. Then you're going to have another church right down the road where the pastor has a completely different passion. Does that mean that that pastor doesn't care about foster kids? No. It just means that some of us have been given a God-given burn, and you have some pastor, you have a burn in your life. Maybe your burn is for lost people. And so, man, if you have a senior pastor with a burn for lost people, you know what's going to happen? It's going to affect the way you disciple people. Guaranteed. So you just have to be honest with yourself. This is the looking in the mirror part of this, because what I say is the convergence of the place you're at, the people that God has brought together, and the passion of your church, but particularly the most visible and vocal leaders of the church, is this convergence right here where you're starting to get a sense for what the family resemblance is going to be. Remember I talked about family resemblance? Because I'm telling you that if I meet somebody and I say, oh, you're from First Pres Bakersfield. I got some of my buddies here from First Pres Bakersfield. I say First Pres Bakersfield. I guarantee you that that disciple is going to have some little feature that's a family resemblance, that's a combination of what's happening in Bakersfield, what's happening in that congregation, and what the senior leaders are always talking about, praying about, and ticked off about that's wrong with our world and the gospel needs to revolutionize. This is the beginning homework of getting clarity. So first of all, you recognize the problem. We're spending too much time in the lower room. We all are. I'm not picking on you. I'm saying it about myself. Second of all, we say, okay, well, really, who are we? Let's be honest about it. Let's be honest about it, because that's going to impact what we're going to do. I always say, like, I don't know about you, but back in middle school, I had the padlock on my gym locker. You know, it was the 3 numbers. You got to go all the way to the right. You go back past the left. And you get, 3 numbers. I would say this is the locker combination. It's the 3 things that unlock the beginning glimpse of your identity as a church. So this is the way to unlock it. So the master tool, which is what I want you to learn today, and then, there's books and training, and there's all kinds of stuff that you can pursue this further. By the way, when we work with churches, when I say we, I'm continuing to talk about Auxano. When we work with churches, we use this master tool I'm about to show you, and it's so important that we sit down in it and really do a good job of it and not rush it, that it usually takes us months and months to actually clarify. So I'm going to show you today the tool, but the tool is not like a quick, hey, by tomorrow morning, we're going to have our vision clarified, okay? This is discernment and prayer and Holy Spirit leading and conversations and even kind of holy fights, right? Like the good kind of fight where you're like, I don't agree with you. What do you mean by that? Like that needs to happen in the collaboration to discern the locker combination and the clarity of vision. So this is what the master tool is. It's called a vision frame. So here's the vision frame. The vision frame serves symbolically in 2 ways. Number one, it could be a mirror. And if it were a mirror, it enables me to look at myself, or we look at ourselves as a church and say, okay, who are we? But it's also a window, transparent, through which we look into the future that God has for us. So the vision frame becomes important just as the construct or graphic way for us to answer the 5 critical questions. Because the way we do it when we're working with a church is we put the question, what, right here, why, right here. Remember I went through these 5 questions earlier with you. How, when, sounds like when, and where. Remember, where is God taking us is the where question, the 5th irreducible question. And you notice that's in the window, right? Because we're looking through it and into the future. We're saying, in light of all of what's going on at our church, where could God be taking us as I peer through that window into a partly unknown future? Because sometimes when we dream about the possibilities that God has for us, they'll be very clear, and other times they'll be a little fuzzy. They're a little more aspirational, like we don't exactly know what God's going to do, but based on what we know about ourselves, it seems like God could do what? And you're answering that question. This is the least refined, the least specific language out of all of the answers to all of the questions. And then for those of you who I saw you taking notes earlier, just as a reminder, when we do this, the answer to what is mission. The answer to why are our values. The answer to how is our strategy. The answer to when or when is our outcomes. How do we know that disciples are actually being made? Remember, this is the one where we're not just counting butts and bucks. We're counting the character and competency of someone who follows Jesus Christ in his ways and his teachings, right? And then where, in my world, is that's what we talk about, vision clarity. Like in light of this diagram, this vision frame for how we make disciples, our vision is this frame in a completed form. Let me give you another way to look at it, which may be helpful. This helped me. Because this gets a lot like organizational design speak. It gets a little nerdy, right? Because we're talking mission, vision, value stuff. But here's what I kept forgetting when I was in your shoes. In other words, remember I told you about the big megachurch, 15,000 people, 8 campuses, blah, blah, blah. When Auxano came and did this with us, I kept thinking, because I'm a word nerd, right? I kept thinking about, oh yeah, what are we going to say? How is it going to feel really good when we say it, right? Because I got like into the technicality of mission, vision, values language. But what I kept forgetting was, wait, this is actually all about discipleship, which means it's ultimately about people, not about statements that get put on a website. So that's why I said, remember I introduced you to Joe? So Joe, we have to keep thinking about Joe. Because here's when I know we have clarity at a church when it comes to discipleship. The answer to the question what, or our mission, is what Joe hears about what we're all about. In other words, if Joe's new, if Joe's long time, doesn't matter. The point is, Joe needs, this is what Joe hears. Joe hears. This is what Joe hears. Our values are what Joe experiences. So before Joe ever has words to put on it, Joe starts to feel, oh, I've been coming to this church. I can feel that they really care about prayer here. Or Joe may say, man, I just can really feel like that they're going way out of their way to help people that don't understand the faith. Like they have all these super simple ways for basic Christianity. They must really care about uninitiated or new people. Joe's going to feel that before he ever knows that you declared it as a church value, right? But he's going to experience it. These are the fun ones. Strategy is where Joe goes. Remember I said we make menus and not maps? This is where Joe goes. So if you say to Joe, hey, glad you're here, it's really simple. The way we do it is there's really kind of 2 or 3 major areas. Maybe there's 4 in your church, I don't know. But we don't want 10. We want 2 or 3. And we say, Joe, it's pretty easy, man. If you start coming to worship and then you go to one of our classes, or if you come to worship and you get into one of our groups, or if you come to worship and then you also serve on a team, or whatever it is, you're basically telling Joe, this is where you need to go. Why? Because we've decided that that's the best place for you to grow in your faith and spiritual formation. But here's the question for church leaders. Is that place that you're sending Joe actually growing his faith and his spiritual formation? This is the hard work, right? Because sometimes what happens when you start to clarify this is you go, wait a second. We've been sending people to that course or that class or that group or that session. We've been doing it for years, and we're not sure it's actually even working. So do you have the guts to say that the strategy is not God? Technically, the strategy is super malleable, right? By the way, I want to remind you, this whole thing, the frame, the wood, whatever, this is the theology. That's not going anywhere. You got your theology, we're not messing with that. But on top of the theology, this should be malleable, but in most churches it's not. In essence, what they're saying is, we don't care whether our strategy for discipleship works. But you start asking the questions, where should we send Joe? You remember the Reveal study, one of my friends just reminded me of it, the Reveal study, Ian reminded me of it. The Reveal study happened back in the Midwest. They looked at a bunch of churches and they asked the question, are people actually being discipled in our churches? And of course the answer was basically no. But one of the large churches found out, much to their surprise, that one of the key places for people to actually grow deeply and be spiritually formed was if they would go on a short-term mission trip. Now, some of you who have been on mission trips are like, oh, heck yeah, I've done it. It's great. Well, you know what that church decided? Their goal for discipleship was that every man, woman, boy, and girl that came to their church would go on a short-term mission trip within the next couple of years. And people are like, well, whoa, that's too much, or that's crazy, or how can you organize that? They were like, we don't care, we got to figure it out, because if we actually care about discipleship, and if it's actually the best strategy, then we got to do it. So I say, that's courageous, because most churches would be like, oh, come on, Greg. I mean, we can't, not everybody. How could everybody? I mean, that's just for the people that are really into missions. And they're like, no, we're really into discipleship. And so that's where we're going to send people, right? So strategy, and by the way, most of the churches that we work with will end up making a strategy diagram or literal iconography where they'll say, okay, here's worship, and here's a group, and here's a course, and they literally make like a diagram so that it's a map, literally. And you can say to people, hey, these are the things that we do to help you grow and know Christ and follow in his ways and in his teachings. We think these 3 things are the best places for you to go. Now, again, under this one, let's say this one is groups. Well, if you double click on it, of course, your church may have 50 groups. But the point is, it's a classification called groups, right? And what ends up happening in most churches is, again, the menu methodology happens almost irrespective of results or outcomes. And that's where you get to this one. The when part of this is what Joe, becomes. This is what Joe becomes. That's my favorite one. And these two are linked together, by the way. So where Joe goes, where we send Joe, should result in Joe becoming what we were hoping Joe would become. Now, the tricky part about this for great theologians and Presbyterians, I'm not just being patronizing, Presbyterians are great theologians, right? So when you say, well, what is a disciple? Well, you could say 150 characteristics of a disciple. Because you know your Bible and you know all these different things about how the New Testament describes this is people of darkness and how they act, and this is people of light, right? And these are the fruits of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness. Then you can go into other character traits of the New Testament, whether it's humility or self-sacrifice or communal acts like forgiving one another, loving one another. I mean, we could have 150 characteristics. And I'm not telling you to abandon those things in your teaching, but what I am telling you is we have to make it as clear as we possibly can in our basic schematic for discipleship. And so here's what I ask churches to do. If you had to come up with only 5 or 6 things where you said, man, if every man and woman in our church exhibited these 5 or 6 characteristics, hold on, let me get a better side of the pen. Or a better pen. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's say it's 5 things. If it's 5 things that you are driving toward in your discipleship, again, not 5 exclusively, but 5 primarily, and you said to yourself, man, at our church, let's talk about my buddies from First Pres Bakersfield. At First Pres Bakersfield, we would be delighted if we could create systems and strategies so that Joe or Josephine or Matt or Sally all exhibited these 5 things: humility, prayerfulness, worshipfulness, whatever it is. The point is they would have done the hard work of discerning and prayerful refining of saying, look, baseline, we would love it if the things that we did produced these kinds of disciples. So what does a First Pres Bakersfield disciple look like? Because I'm going to tell you, there's a certain family resemblance at that church that they were going to want to call out. And by the way, just to give you a sense for how churches do this, there's usually 4 or 5 outcomes that they measure. There's usually 4 or 5 values. There's usually 3 or 4 places, strategic places that we send people. And we say that a mission statement is only good if it is clear, concise, contextual, compelling, and less than 12 words. Because many mission statements are either too theological, too technical, too long, too wordy, too confusing. Again, stick with me here. Why are we doing this? Because we think it's neat to have mission, vision, value statements? No, because when you bring clarity to your people, they can actually get on your mission with you. Because I'm telling you right now, if I came to your church and I did my test of random 30 people pulling out of your worship service, I'm telling you that they emotionally are on mission with you. But organizationally, they probably don't know what you're trying to do exactly and why. So again, is that a sin? Probably not. But it could be a lot better. And the better thing is alignment and people really rowing in the same direction. Because now what happens is I start to ask questions. Oh, that new idea that someone has? Great. We will run it through the grid of, does it fit within the schematic of our values? Is it one of our strategic concerns? Does it produce these kinds of disciples? Is it part of our mission? Because right now all we say is, well, gosh, Mark's such a great guy and he has this great idea. Who would say no to Mark? That's our criteria usually for strategy. Churches do a terrible job saying no to things. You know that. I know that. I am that sometimes. Because you know who gets into ministry? A bunch of us that are softies. We have soft hearts. We love people. We're in ministry because we felt the love of God on us, and we want to give that love of God to other people. So I'm stereotyping us a little bit, but I'm saying most of us are terrible at saying no because we just don't want to deal with the fallout. We just don't want to deal with the fact that maybe someone won't like us. We just don't want to deal with being the grumpy pastor or grumpy elder, right? But you know what ends up happening? We just keep adding things on. And then when we add things on, then we say, we're so tired because you know how many ministries we have going right now? And we can't stop any one of them because if we stop one, someone's going to get mad at us. And I say, hey, let's try something new. What if we got so much clarity about our methodology that we said, you know what, Mark, that's a great idea. Love it, man. But you know what, we're not going to do that right now because it doesn't fit within what we're trying to accomplish as a church. And we're still giving this a college try because we actually think this is the best way to make disciples. So we're not saying your idea is bad. We're just saying there's only so much we can do. We only have so much time. We only have so much money. We only have so much facility. So if at your church you don't have a good grid for saying no to things, you don't have clarity. As a matter of fact, you know what will happen in some churches? Some churches get so much clarity around their disciple-making methodology, finally, for the first time after decades, that some people who have been hanging on, trying to make the church fit their image of what a church should be, finally go, oh, Pastor, is that what we're doing? I'm out. You know what I say? Good. You finally have clarity, and you finally have someone who was kind of sabotaging things, trying to move their church into the image of what they thought the church would be, and now you're saying, no, this is who we are. And they go, I don't want it to be that. You say, it's okay. That's who we are. That's who we are. And we bless you if you need to go, but we'd love it if you'd stay. But if you're going to stay, you're going to do this. And you're like, Greg, that sounds mean. Maybe. But to me, what it sounds and what I've experienced is it's clarity, and clarity goes a very long way. I have our company founder say, clarity isn't everything, but it changes everything. It changes everything because now, for instance, at the church that I just came to, I've only been there for 6 months, but guess what I'm doing with the church I just went to? This. Was it a terrible church that needed me to come in and rescue it? No. But I'll tell you what, you know what's happening now? I'm saying to the small groups guy, don't let someone be a group leader if they don't buy into what we think is the most valuable part of our church and our discipleship process. I just did performance reviews with our staff because I'm the executive pastor. We have 22 people on staff. Guess what part of our performance review is with the staff? Well, of course, their job, but also, are they living out the values of our church? Why do I care about that with the staff? Because if the staff's not living out the values, then we got a problem because the staff will be the ones that will drive the culture. But if you're a small church and you don't have a big staff, you know who drives the culture at your church. It's not always a staff person, right? It's influential lay people. And what I would say is there's a new day for you, and the new day for you is to say to those influential people, hey, we've got a great idea about how to clarify the way forward. And this is kind of like a get on or get off moment. And I'm just telling you, based on what I said in the earlier hour, we got to try something, folks. And I suggest we try clarity around discipleship. And I think part of it is to say, now we know how to train and vet leaders. Now we know how to measure things more than just input measures. I have churches now in our network of churches that come up with anonymous, self-evaluative surveys for their congregation on their 5 or 6 marks of a disciple. What do I mean by that? They literally put out a quick survey every 9 months that says, hey, how are you doing in these 5 areas? And because it's anonymous, people are honest. And then people are honest, and they literally have quantitative measures over those 5 areas. And then the elders and pastors of the church get it and go, hey, everyone, thanks for taking the survey. It looks like we've not done a great job of teaching and shepherding you in the category of prayer based on how you evaluated yourself. So guess what we're going to do in the next month? We're going to own that as pastors and elders, and we're going to do a better job of teaching us all how to pray. So see what happened there? The measures are not legalistic checkbox clipboard kind of deal where it says, hey, you bad Christians, if you're not doing those 5 key things, it's not finger wagging, right? It's, hey, how are we all doing? How are the elders and pastors doing at shepherding you toward the things that are most important in your life in Christ? And then you evaluate yourself anonymously. We're not trying to make anybody feel bad. We're just trying to do a great job of discipling people at our church. And so many of our churches are, by the way, this is hard to do. It's not easy, but it's worth it. It's worth trying something. It's especially worth trying it if you can do it in a manner that doesn't feel legalistic or like you're finger wagging, but if it feels like an all play, like we're all doing this together. And so the churches that get traction in this describe such a beautiful picture of what I will become or what Joe will become that when I start to see it in myself, I say, oh my gosh, it's happening. The thing that my church has been praying about and telling me would happen in my life in Christ is happening. I see it in my own life. And you better believe that's like rocket fuel for your church, because then all of a sudden people are like, oh my gosh, we simplified it. We got a little tougher about being really focused on our strategy. We described what it means to make disciples at our particular church in our particular town with our particular people and our particular leaders, and bam, it's happening. Matter of fact, I heard pastors going to stop doing that one thing because it's not actually working and helping us make disciples. Well, what does that communicate to people? That communicates what you're actually trying to do at your church, which is make disciples. Because if something doesn't work that way, then you're not going to keep doing it. So I wanted you to be introduced to this master tool, which is the picture of what I described earlier verbally, the 5 irreducible questions of leadership. What, why, how, when, and where. And I want to encourage you that the more time you spend in this with your team, and by the way, this is a collaborative effort. I do not suggest that the pastor comes down from a mountain with a stone tablet that has a vision frame etched on it. This is an all play. As a matter of fact, when we work with churches, we ask pastor to bring 12 people into the room, not all staff, not all men, not all people that are middle-aged. And we say, let's sense what God is doing and how we can be most clear about our discipleship process, and that's how we do it. And so, by the way, this is fascinating. I know some of you in here are part of other extensions of the EPC, our global missions group. It's, I think, presenting today too. Others of you have, maybe you run a business. You're not a vocational ministry person. You run a business. I was talking to Ian a little earlier. He consults businesses, and he said, hey, a lot of the things you're talking about, Greg, can translate from organization to organization because it's the basic principles of clarity and organizational design that help something go from where it's at to where it could be. The guy that originally invented this tool for Auxano that we use with churches actually has a personal vision clarity version of this. Some of you are way ahead of me. You're already like, well, Greg, I kind of need this for my family. Or I need this for my own life. So let's just do it real quick. What if Greg knew what my mission is in life? What if I knew what God called me to do? And what if I articulated what I truly value, the things that I hold most dear in my life? What if I decided what are the strategic places I need to find myself to be able to see that become a reality in my life? What if I decided what are the things that will be manifested in my life? And I'll know, it's happening. The mission that God gave me is actually happening. What will be the signs and symbols of that happening? And then in light of that, what are my dreams for the future? Where could God take me or me and Andrea in our marriage and in our family if we were really listening to God and fulfilling the mission God has on our individual lives? So you can see how that goes. I'm not here to teach you the individual personal version of this, but you can see that once you get a good tool, the tool brings clarity, and it brings clarity to you, your organization, your family, and wherever you're heading. But I just want to say to you as church leaders, the reason I do this is because I think it's hard but worth it. And the reason that I serve church leaders is because you're my tribe. And so if there's anything today that I can help you with, subsequent to today, obviously I'd love to do that. But I hope this was helpful to you today because it just gives you another way to look at things. Like, I know you all been thinking about this stuff, so it's not like I'm coming in here and saying, hey, pastor, you should think about discipleship. I get it. I get that I'm in a very astute crowd. What I brought with me today, though, were tools. And it's just another tool in your tool bag to say, hey, this vision frame tool may be helpful as you bring clarity to what God has for you in the coming months and years. Let me just do this real quick because I got to take off for the airport. But I'd love to do a little Q&A. Let's just do a live. If anybody has questions or comments, I'll do it right now. I've just got a few minutes for that. If you don't, that's cool too. I'll just leave. Yes, sir.
How do you get a specific result with a variety of people?
Yeah. Under expert facilitation.
Okay. Like you.
Like me. Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's the short answer. Because otherwise, whether it's me or someone else, it does, a lot of this gets slowed down if you don't have an outsider who comes in and kind of helps facilitate that meeting, because there's too many relationships and emotions and attachments in the room. Whereas like when I'm an outsider, I can say things that other people would be like, hey, did he say that to Sue? Oh, yeah. But I fly home, so it doesn't matter to me, right? I'm teasing, but I'm not, because actually it is a hard process that does take some expert facilitation. Yes, sir?
For sustainability, session rolls off, a third of session rolls off every single year.
Yeah.
What would you recommend to keep this in front of the church over a longer period of time?
Yeah, so the integration of the vision frame is where it's the hardest, right? Because it's kind of fun when you're in the session with the 12 people and you're coming up with the words and you get a lot of energy from it. And then what happens is you actually have to go live it out, right? And so living it out affects a lot of places, not the least of which is leadership, staff, session, et cetera. And so what I would say is session people should be expert at the vision frame at your church. Whether they are coming on to session or whether there should be almost like an onboarding. But that's not just session. That's like, I would want to go, if there's someone leading a small group at your church, I would hope that man or woman is expert. They could take a napkin out at a restaurant and draw a vision frame and tell me what First Pres Bakerfield's vision frame is. But also, it's in leadership training, it's in staff meetings. There's lots of ways to integrate it so that people are reminded of it. And then, of course, you're actually creating decision-making grids. Like, we're going to say yes or no to things based on the clarity of our vision frame. There's other fun things, too, like everything from, like the branding stuff, like signage and website and that kind of stuff. But those are basics. The harder thing is actually making sure the people are embracing it and in as many fresh ways as possible, because it can get a little tired. Yes?
How often do you revisit and reform and
Yeah.
reimagine it, whatever?
It's great. It's a great question, and I have one answer to it, but it's not definitive. The short version of it is 7 years. But the longer version of that is there's actually an interesting biological thing about how our bodies literally replenish. Maybe there's biologists in the room, but I think every cell in our body gets turned over, and I think it's every 7 years. And so there was this spiritual discovery that maybe that happens in living organisms too, like an organization. But I don't hold that as gospel, because maybe there are circumstances in your community or in the change of your leadership that would cause you to do it quicker than 7 years. But when you get this, you need to kind of play it out for a while, so you don't want to change it every couple years. Yes? I think you would revisit it, but also here's the other thing that I found. When you have a real clear understanding of who you are and what your process is, that's how you can evaluate the next senior pastor coming in. Because if that senior pastor comes in and says, yeah, all that stuff, I don't believe in any of that, I would go, ooh. Now, can they come in and say, hey, can I tweak it a little bit so that I can own it? And sure. I think that's very wise organizational leadership, but it should be clear enough that it helps you evaluate kind of who you want leading it too. Yes?
Can you describe a sample, such as for Vintage Church? Kind of give us a sample of what they did?
Yeah. Oh, gosh, I'm running out of time, but I'll try. So let me just talk about values, for instance. And by the way, we're literally doing it right now, so I won't even remember them all. I just got out of sessions this week. One of the values is that we are urban missionaries, because we live in LA, and we don't want people who resent LA and its complexities. We want people who love LA and love their neighbors who don't yet know Christ. So being an urban missionary is one of our values. Another one of our values is being a messy family, that we are a family, and yet there's brokenness in it, and we have to anticipate that we have to love each other in spite of our brokenness and receive even messy people into our family and so on. So that's the idea. You start to declare those values. Strategically, we have 3 zones. The one zone is the worship gathering. The second zone we call belong, and that is people getting into groups that are based on social connection, moving people out of isolation and into groups. And the third zone is called renew, where we send people to courses for kind of renewal of their heart. So this would be like Bible training courses, even addiction recovery courses, things like that. So gather in worship, be in a connected group of fellow believers, and then renew your heart, mind, and soul through courses that refresh you. And so that's our strategy. So we say to people, you need to be in those 3 places at some time or another. And then outcomes we're still working on, but we want people that are listening to the Spirit, have a finger on the text of God's Word. We're still working through those, but that's an example. Yeah?
As churches, or as you have seen churches work through this, where are the pitfalls? Where can things go wrong, or the church get distracted?
Yeah. I think the primary pitfall is what the Bakersfield guys just asked, and that is it tends to be really exciting when you're creating it, but then it tends to be a little harder to actually integrate it into the life of the church. So the pitfalls are rarely during this process. They're often once we have it, and now we're like, okay, now what do we do with it? So that's why I talked about, and that's probably why they asked it too, because they've done some of this work, and they're probably experiencing some of this. Well, it's there, but it's not being lived out in the life of our church. So how do we get it lived out? And what I always say, by the way, this is one thing I meant to mention today, God is working on me on right now. You know the 20-80 principle? Here's my prophetic word for you today. The 20-80 principle, where 20% of the people do 80% of the work, I always used to resent that. I used to be like, what is wrong with those 80%? They need to get their butts in gear. Until I realized, I'm just going to spend my time with the 20% because they're willing to be discipled and led on your mission. I'm going to love the 80%. This is just for me. You take it how you want to take it. I'm going to lead through the 20%. I'm going to love the 80%. But you know what a lot of pastors do? They run around with the 80% that will never help you with your mission. They'll never give you money. They'll never give you personal sacrifice. They'll never lead a group. They'll never do anything. But they're the ones that are the squeaky wheel. Should they be loved and shepherded? You bet. Love them and shepherd them. But don't ever think that you're going to accomplish your mission through the 80%. You need to identify the 20% and recognize that they're rowing with you, and that's how you lead. And I would say part of the integration of this, I'm going to start to teach from now on, is identify the 20% and don't be afraid of that principle. Don't resent that principle like I did. Lean right into it and say, ma'am, you're part of my 20%. I wouldn't say it that way, but basically, ma'am, you're on the team. I need you to row with me. You ready? She's going to go, I'm ready. They're going to be the ones that know how to do the vision frame and so on. So I would say, just as personal for me, maybe it's for you, the word I'm getting from the Lord right now is lead through the 20%, love the 80%. Yes, sir. Yeah. Yeah. It's true. It's true. So I promise I won't do that 30 random people at your church. I won't do it. Because you found the fault in my methodology.
I have a question about the model. I understand that this is for the entire church, for where we're going this group. But would it work to first introduce the model individually? So say your sessions, you're going to work on your session to understand what each one of those parts means, and then to talk to each other about where the differences are, where the similarities are. In other words, does an individual response to this diagram translate to work for the whole church?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think just to save yourself a lot of confusion and chaos, I would start with the whole church and make sure that that is super clear, because otherwise there's going to be a lot of different versions of what clarity is for our church. So even if the session are part of that original 12, I just think you have to start kind of from a central and then allow it to emanate out. So you really need to have, especially if you've never done this before, you need to have only one vision frame.
So I can envision people trying to figure out where they fit in. How do you help them to understand where they fit into this?
Oh, yeah. So, again, 3 more minutes and I got to go. I'm sorry. I love your question. One of the things we say about a vision frame that is whole and healthy is that it's an all play, meaning if I can't see myself as the pastor in the vision frame, as Joe, then it's not going to work. In other words, it needs to work for everybody. It's not a mission just for, the super holy Christians. It's for everybody. Everyone needs to see themselves as on this mission, part of this strategy, valuing these things, and so on. And so the integration comes from everyone seeing it as not just for a certain segment of the church, but for everybody. We can all be part of the mission. So, yeah. This is great. This is a lot of fun. I keep telling you I got to go, so yeah.
I'm curious about, I feel like we've done this with sessions for the whole church.
Yeah.
I'm more curious because I'm the family pastor, how we do this, how we take that and apply it to our youth and children's ministry. Like, do we go to the board and do this now that we have what the whole church is doing?
Yeah.
And let that influence the way that we, or are we just trying to do what session decided for the whole church?
Yeah, that's a hard one to answer, but I will say to you, ideally, the way the vision frame is created, that's why I'll say sometimes up here, what do we want every man, woman, boy, and girl to become? Because the things up here should apply to teenagers too. So if I'm saying I want this discipleship characteristic, it's not like a separate set of characteristics for like a 15-year-old. So ideally, you want to start with, how could our church's vision frame be manifest in how we do our kids department? That's ideal. Are there inevitably tweaks you have to make with things like strategy, et cetera? Of course. But what you don't want, the danger is everyone falls in love with a tool and we're like, we got a vision frame for this department and that department and this department, and then it gets a little wonky. But your question is excellent and often asked because of the very same reasons you're asking it. Yeah. One more? One more. It's okay. I just want you to feel the love from the front here, that you don't have a fully formed question. This stuff is complex. And you can tell by what I'm doing right now is that I feel like I'm constantly hearing new things from the Lord on how to lead, and I'm trying them out, right? And in my own church, we're still trying to clarify our vision frame. And so if the 20% thing threw you off, let me retract that as that was for me, may not be for you, but I'm just trying to listen to God and go, how do I lead well a group of people that need to be shepherded and discipled when it's so complex these days that I'm shooting for not just simplicity and clarity, but also I want to know what men and women are going to actually help me do this. And that could be particularly because of God's wiring of me, and not everybody's wired like I am. Like if you think of the fivefold gifts of apostle, prophet, shepherd, teacher, evangelist, like some of you in the room are wired differently than me. So you hear what I'm saying and you're like, ugh, that's terrible. I'm a shepherd. This whole 20-80 thing drives me crazy. 100% of the people need to be loved and discipled. I get that if it's a different wiring. Yeah. Yeah, well, hopefully they will be in classes and groups and courses or whatever vehicles you choose. I'm not saying that the 80% are not involved in this. I'm just saying that they're least likely to be the ones help you leading this. So they're still being discipled. So I want to distinguish between disciples, which we all are, and those who I am finding will help me lead the church. And I used to kind of feel bad about going to those people first, but now I don't feel bad about it anymore. I just feel like God's given those people to the church as lay people to help execute the mission. And those people with me will love and disciple the rest of the crowd. Yeah, you're welcome.
All right. This is going to be the most profound 20-second prayer you've ever heard. Father, thank you for Greg. Thank you for the way you've gifted him, and thank you for his commitment to this tribe, mostly for his commitment to you and to seeing your gospel go out and to help to support the discipleship efforts in each of our churches. I pray that you would richly bless him and his family, give him a safe but quick but safe trip down to Sacramento as he tries to catch his flight. Blessings on him in Jesus' name. Amen.